Welcome to the From Toxic to Healthy, Healthy Relationships Masterclass series. I'm your host, Jen Youngquist, and today I'm speaking with Michelle Ferris. She is a marriage and family therapist who specializes in codependency, relationship skills, and anger management. Michelle is here to go in depth with us on codependent relationships. So welcome, Michelle, and thank you for being part of this important conversation.
Oh, thanks, Jen. I'm really happy that we got to meet and I get to be here.
Yeah. So let's start our conversation by maybe defining a little bit more about what codependency is or what a codependent relationship is.
Perfect. So there's probably so many different definitions out there, which is honestly why I think people miss it sometimes and don't think they are codependent. But for me, codependency is about it's a relationship dynamic where somebody focuses too much on either helping, rescuing, or even trying to control another person. And they do it because they want to help. They realize as a kid that's how they got their value. But what happens is they neglect themselves in the process. So they don't take care of themselves really well. They can't say no. They don't set boundaries. So they kind of are the last person to realize that they have a part in the problem because codependents look really good. They're overachievers. They're really good at what they do. They're the ones everybody goes to for help. So it can be really challenging for them to see it as an issue.
Good. Yeah, understand.
Yeah.
So then why do you think is it so hard for people to stop doing the people-pleasing things and to focus on themselves?
Well, codependents get a lot of validation through other people. So when they're pleasing other people, they get a lot of kudos. People love it, right? I mean, if I do what you want, you're going to probably ask me to do it again, and you're probably going to have a positive relationship with that. Because, when I'm pleasing somebody else, they're usually pretty happy. The problem is that there needs to be a balance with that. So they find that they don't see it as a problem because they don't really recognize that it actually is hurting themselves. So they keep doing it because it actually seems to be working. Other people like it. They may feel loved and cherished because they're doing what other people want them to do. But inside, at some point, they usually hit a wall and go, okay, I'm really tired, or I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. But they feel trapped because they've built their relationships on people pleasing. So it gets really hard to reverse that.
Got it. So it also kind of sounds a little bit like, and maybe you can tell the difference here, like someone who's a narcissist also likes to do things in order to get that recognition and to, just kind of, it makes them feel better when they get that. So is there a difference between codependents and narcissists?
Yeah, narcissists, they actually often get into relationship together because the narcissist person is all about themselves. They're very focused on what they need, what they want, which is the complete opposite of the codependent. The codependent is super focused on what other people want. So in the beginning, the narcissist and the codependent feel like a match made in heaven, but very quickly it turns sour because, again, it's really hard to maintain that because the codependent sets up to always be the giver, and the narcissist or the alcoholic or the person who needs a rescue is the one doing all the taking. So of course, at first it may work, but it's not sustainable without a lot of pain.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about how someone that is or maybe identifies as a codependent or is in a codependent relationship, how do you start to heal that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of what's really hard about that is that codependents see their partner or the other people in their life as the problem. Because let's face it, if you're in a relationship with a narcissist, it's going to be really easy to see them as the problem, right? They're swallowing me up. They're asking for too much. It's always about them. But the codependent needs to get that focus off of them and realize that, wait a minute, I need to focus more on myself. And it's really hard for them to do that because they see these people with chaotic lives and they're trying to fix them. So they actually have to get to the point in 12-step programs where they have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. They have to be just done. Like, okay, I cannot keep doing this one more time. So that creates the opening of recovery, because if they can start to realize that they are part of the problem, that's when recovery can happen.
Yeah, so important to have that self-realization that it does take two people to be in a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And because the codependent looks really good, it's really hard for them to see, well, I'm doing so much. How am I the problem? He just needs to stop drinking. And I've heard that so many times, even in Al-Anon, when people come into Al-Anon, they think, why do I have to go to Al-Anon? You know, they should get sober, but they don't realize that they're actually fueling some of these patterns by not setting boundaries, by not taking care of themselves first.
So let's talk a little bit about boundaries. I know it's really hard for codependents to set them.
Yeah.
So how do you help someone understand what boundaries are and to really kind of get the courage to enforce them?
Mm-hmm. Well, first they have to be able to recognize what they need. And because sometimes we all have a gut check, like we know, something's not right, but we aren't really paying much attention to what that really is. So what I encourage people who have codependency is to start tuning into that, because it's most likely a stomach ache, a headache, tightening in your chest, where your body is really saying no, but you're not recognizing it as no.
Mm-hmm.
So if they can start to realize that, you know what, I don't want to volunteer at my kid's school 5 days a week. I don't want to constantly talk to my friend about her problems every day. I'm wiped out. That's the beginning, because if they can start to identify, what do you not want to keep doing? That's where they can go, okay, I don't want to keep doing that. Maybe we can start to set a boundary around that.
So it almost sounds like it's about managing your energy a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, I think it is. That's a great point, Jennifer, because boundaries are not really about getting somebody else to change. And I think that's what people often think is, you know, I'm going to tell somebody, you can't drink around me. Well, you can't really enforce that unless you decide to leave when they start drinking. That's where the boundary is the most powerful, because if I get to choose, we all get to choose what we participate in and when we leave. And that's really the cleanest form of the boundary that I teach. It's not about getting somebody else to do something different, because we can make a request, but we can't make it happen.
Yes, we only have control over ourselves.
Right. And there's a lot of power to say, no, thank you, I'm not going to go to the bar tonight. Or I'm not going to drive with you because I don't feel safe. You know, you can get yourself there. I'm going to take my own car, and be polite about it, but to also, you know, protect yourself.
Sounds like this would be something that maybe a codependent person would have to start small with.
Oh, yes. Yes. I'm so glad you said that. Yeah. You really want to start with the people you feel safest with. You don't want to start with a huge boundary, like I'm going to leave you if, you know, it might just be something really small, like even like expressing an opinion instead of going along with, oh, I agree, or, oh, we can go out to dinner, you pick the place. You might say, hey, you know what? I really want Chinese tonight. That might be the first thing you say, to just assert yourself into what you want in the situation versus going along with what you think somebody else wants.
Yeah, and then so you get a little bit more, kind of build up that courage, maybe,
Yeah.
and then you could make bigger and bigger, set bigger and bigger boundaries and go along.
Right. And that's why starting with people you know are going to most likely honor it. But I know for me, when I first started setting boundaries, I was so scared, because I thought they're going to be so mad at me because I had never done it. And it was so funny, because the first couple times I said no, people didn't even care. They were like, oh, okay. on to the next subject. And I was like about ready to have a heart attack because I was so nervous taking that risk, because I dreamed up in my head that, you know, they're going to be really upset if I say no. And that's why the codependent doesn't set boundaries, because we imagine the worst instead of, you know, most likely the worst isn't going to happen. And they're probably, maybe they'll get disappointed, but you know what? They'll live with it.
Yeah.
You know?
But what if they do get mad? And that might happen,
Yeah,
right? And so you have to be
absolutely
prepared for that.
I think part of setting boundaries, honestly, is very indicative of how healthy the relationship is. Because if I set a boundary and you totally disregard it, that gives me a lot of information about you and the relationship. Doesn't mean I'm going to end it. It just means that I might be a little more cautious. I might not be as vulnerable. I might be more mindful in what I do. But yeah, there is always going to be that percentage, especially if you know in your gut, I don't want to set a boundary with them. That may be telling you, yeah, they might fly off the handle. So you might have to have a plan B, you know, or you might have to set the boundary without even speaking about it, but just doing something different for yourself so that you feel safe and not risking telling them about the boundary, if that makes sense, if it's not safe.
Yeah. So in your experience, when you've worked with people that are on the codependent side, do they usually end up in toxic relationships, or can they be codependent and have a healthy relationship? Is there even such a thing?
I think if they're in recovery, they can shoot towards that. But if they're not in any kind of recovery, yeah, I think their relationships tend to be a lot more problematic and toxic because they're in that cycle of rescuing and controlling, which creates a type of chaos in and of itself. Because nobody likes to be controlled. So the other person on the other end of that is going to probably get defensive and ornery because they don't want, you know, a lot of people don't want advice. You know, even from us as coaches and therapists, you know, I don't get asked advice a whole lot. People want to be heard. They don't want to be told what to do.
Right.
And the codependent doesn't realize that because they see their value as, if I can help you, then everything's going to be okay and I'm going to be okay. Versus if I let you have your pain, then that means I have to feel mine. And that can be a lot more threatening to the codependent because it's harder to feel your feelings.
Oh, very. That's one reason why people, you know, have so many issues, to be
Right.
honest. I mean, because
Yeah.
we don't want to go there and feel our pain. And then so what happens is that pain just gets stuffed down and stuck in your body. And then that comes out and manifests as, well, could be a host of different things, including physical pain.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. Super important point.
Yeah. So then, as far as healing, is there something that a person can work on themselves, or do they need to have someone that can help them see their blind spots?
Yeah. I think a lot of times people think they can heal themselves by reading books, reading blogs, and you can get some healing from that. I'm not going to deny that. But I think trying to heal yourself in isolation is kind of the harder, more painful road because we can't heal the same brain that's sick. And if I'm codependent, I'm going to want to keep being codependent. It's going to take somebody else, a mentor, a therapist, a sponsor, to show me where I'm still practicing those behaviors because I'm not going to know myself. So I think it's really important, even though, you know, the hallmark of codependency is not wanting to ask for help. It's really important to either find a 12-step program and start recovery that way, or find a therapist or a group, something, some tribe that you feel can really help you recover, because this is a day-by-day thing. This is not something you go to therapy with and in a month or a couple of months, you're done and I send them on their way. You know, it takes a long time to slowly heal because to me, codependency is like a tree with many branches. It just goes everywhere. And it doesn't mean we can't get relief pretty quickly. I think we can, but I mean, I've been doing this work for 30 years and I still find things of, okay, oops, I got to do that differently. Or, oh, I'm getting into people pleasing again. Even though I'm mindful, it's easy to do it in a new situation that I may never have done it before, if that makes sense.
So can you tell people a little bit about the process that you might take someone through, and like how long could they expect to, have to work with you?
So the first thing I do is we kind of name what the codependent symptoms are that they're struggling with. And then, we'll talk a little bit about family background, but I want to give them relief pretty quickly. So we kind of talk about, okay, what are some simple ways you can start to take care of yourself? And how can you start to look at these behaviors and start to really focus more on healing yourself versus fixing other people? And then honestly, right away, I always encourage them to go to Al-Anon or Coda, because the clients that do that make faster progress than those that don't, because they have that group support.
And those are the 12-step programs?
Yeah. So Al-Anon is the more seasoned program. It's been around the longest. Coda is newer. They have a little bit different guidelines. I tend to recommend Al-Anon more, but people can choose whichever works for them. But you get a sponsor, you can go to meetings. I mean, therapy is an hour a week, right? And when you work with people, I mean, we can't be there every day. And if they can have a support system that nurtures what we're teaching them and reinforces it, they're going to make a lot more progress and get a lot more relief. So that's why I always recommend it.
Do you think that, or maybe you can speak to people that might have a little bit of shame, maybe, either going to therapy or getting into those kind of programs?
Yeah. Well, sometimes that's why they call a therapist, because they're not ready to do a group. They're really socially uncomfortable with it. They don't want to be that vulnerable. Right now, all of 12-step is using Zoom meetings. So you could literally check it out, have your video off, have your audio off, and just check it out. So I don't think it gets much safer than that, because nobody's going to see you. But yeah, I think there's a certain percentage that come to me and they might start going to a meeting, but not right away. It might be several months later before they finally recognize that they're willing to try it, because they might need a safer environment one-on-one. And there's no judgment about that. Everybody's recovery looks a little bit different. But I just don't urge people to do it completely by themselves, because it's just too hard that way.
Right. So is there anything else that you might want to tell someone that is in a codependent kind of relationship? Because there's another thing, I want to talk to you a little bit about anger management as well. So okay. I just want to go ahead and wrap this part up.
Sure. I would say that you can get relief and you can change these patterns. It doesn't have to take years. You just need the right help. If you can find a therapist that you really feel comfortable with, there are lots of online materials. I have a course on codependency that walks you through what recovery looks like. I mean, that's the good news, is we're in an age where we have so many resources right now. So, I think the ability to heal faster is definitely there, because there's so much great information out there. But don't do it alone. You don't need to do it alone. It's just so much easier when somebody else gets you and really gets, yes, I totally understand why you're people pleasing. I get why you feel guilty taking care of yourself first, because that is what frees us, right? Is to really feel like, oh, I'm not by myself. I'm not the only one struggling with this. And I think there's a lot of healing in that.
And that was a big reason for me putting together this summit, is I wanted everybody to know and understand that they're not alone. That
Yeah.
There are so many people out there. It can help in so many different ways.
Oh yeah, I'm so glad.
Together.
You picked such a great topic, because toxic relationships, I mean, you can have it with a spouse, a mother, a friend, your child. I mean, it's not just romantic relationships. It's it can be anyone. So I'm really, really glad you're highlighting that.
Yes.
So good.
I've had a lot of experience with those myself.
Yep, yep.
And that's one reason I wanted to ask you about anger management a little bit, because that has been a lot of my background. Is my father was always really, really angry.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of wanted to, for people that maybe grew up in a situation where there was a parent with some uncontrollable anger, or they seem to lash out at everybody and maybe even everything around them.
Mm-hmm.
What are the roots of that? I don't know that anger is just anger. It's almost like it's covering up for something else.
So are you talking about the person who's raging? What's underneath that?
Yeah, just to help people to understand that might be in a situation that has someone that rages on them a lot. Like, understand it's not you.
No, it's not.
What's underneath all of that?
So I taught a 52-week anger management program. That's how I got introduced to the work. And I'd say 99% of the men that I saw were abused as kids, and they all saw rage. So when you grow up seeing rage, that in your mind is how you do feelings. There is no balance. There is no ability to say, I'm sad, especially men. Men do not have any permission at all to be sad, be afraid, be lonely, to really feel their feelings. Anger, they have permission to do that. So they tend to channel all their frustration and stress, and it comes out as anger because that's the only, feeling they got taught to do. Nowadays, I think that's shifting. I think there are more men that are getting into being more emotionally available and intelligent, thank God. So I think that's reversing. But that's, the person who's raging, what I notice is that they don't recognize their stress. So they come home and they rage at their family, but really their stress started hours ago or even weeks ago. And they didn't recognize that their boss yelled at them, or they've been holding on to a resentment, or they're super tired and they can't admit that they're tired. All of those factors end up creating so much emotion for them that eventually they can't hold on anymore and they're going to snap. And unfortunately, they often do it at home and hurt their families with it.
Yes. So is there any advice you might have for someone that is in that situation where they're living with someone that comes home and rages at them? Is there anything that they can do to the situation, or is it just simply encouraging that person to get help?
Well, I think they have to think of their own safety. Make sure there's enough physical distance between you and them so that you're not in the path of the tornado. Sometimes I recommend, if you can, try to validate their upset. I get you had a really bad day. I get this is really frustrating. I'll bet you're just really frustrated right now. Sometimes that will work. And because if somebody feels heard, they tend to de-escalate. You just have to be careful, because I don't know if a child necessarily needs to be doing that, because that's more of an adult thing. I think if it's your partner, you can absolutely try to validate and go, I really understand how frustrated you are, and you could feedback what they said a little bit, and see if that calms them down. But it really, with someone who rages, it always has to be about safety first.
Yeah.
Totally. And not take it personally, because it is their struggle. It absolutely is their struggle.
Right. And I think that we tend to do that, to take that on personally. As a kid, it's kind of like, why am I always getting yelled at? What did I do? Am I just...
Well, it's incredibly hurtful. So it's really hard not to feel unloved, or, like you're being targeted. I totally understand that. And yet I almost treat it like the alcoholic. Their anger is something they cannot control. Doesn't excuse it, doesn't mean they can't get help and they need help. So it's really more about, what do you need to do to protect yourself and not do anything to invoke it? Because sometimes people will evoke it to get it over with. And I don't recommend that, you know.
Well, the other thing that left me feeling guilty was whenever my father would try to, hug us or, want to be close, we didn't want to be close to him because he had already violated that condition of safety.
Right.
And so I always, I would push him away or not want to be around him.
Yeah.
And I always felt guilty about that.
Yeah, but that was your boundary.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that might have been where some of this codependency on my part maybe started, with not understanding boundaries and, my parents weren't super, present with
Mhm.
us.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so, we kind of felt like we had to do things to please them,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So I just kind of wanted people that might be in that situation to, understand that it's not you.
And you have every reason to not want to be hugged by your dad.
Yeah,
And there should have been another adult to say that to you, to say, you know what, I understand why you don't want to hug dad. It's okay.
yeah,
And unfortunately, we didn't grow up with that.
right,
Our parents just didn't have the education emotionally to be able to do that.
exactly.
So,
And that could carry over to the spouse too. If that
mhm.
safety has been violated, especially for a long time,
Right.
I can understand that there might be people that would feel like pushing their spouse away as well. And I'm sure that probably
Mhm.
lead to another argument or explosion there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because anger, especially abusive anger, creates a lot of fear and distrust. So it's going to be really hard to be connected, to have sex, to hug when there's been rage, because there's probably been abuse as well, whether it's verbal or physical. And that's when therapy can be really, really helpful to start to heal some of that.
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing your wisdom with us today. Would you like to tell viewers where they can find you and what you might
Sure.
have coming up?
Sure. So my website is counselingrecovery.com. And I really enjoy doing online courses. So I have some on my website. One in particular is, I do have one called Healing Codependency. That's about a 50-minute video and a workbook. And it can walk you through the process of what recovery looks like, how to start setting boundaries, how to use detachment, things like that to really get you started. Because the great thing about recovery is there are a lot of practical skills you can use. And I tend to be pretty practical. I mean, yes, we can talk about childhood and all that stuff, but I know people want relief. They want to know, what do I do to take care of myself? What do I do differently? So I tend to have a lot of tips on my website around just practical things to help you communicate better and take care of yourself.
Awesome. So make sure you check her out and grab Michelle's free gift below, which is 8 ways to honor yourself in codependent relationships. Thank you, Michelle, for being here today.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. It was lovely chatting with you.
Likewise.